before we really get going today, I want to remind you, Easter's 4 weeks away. Now, this is a big weekend here at Awaken. We can make a whole weekend of it. Friday night we begin 7 p.m. We do a Good Friday. It's kind of a time of remembering. We think about the cross. We receive communion together. We sing some songs. We read some scripture. It's a really awesome night of reflection, of remembering the cross and that Jesus went and that he died on it on our behalf. So I would invite you to be here Friday night at 7 o'clock. You don't want to miss it. And then Saturday, we begin really celebrating, again, a day early. But we're going to have, to my left, your right, out here in this big field, we've got these giant inflatables, like a huge obstacle course. And we could even have races between all the adults. We could kick the kids off. And you guys can just, go after it if you want to for an hour. Free food, lots of fun. And listen, here's the thing. You get to be a huge part of this. And this is one of these events that we have that literally reaches hundreds of families from our community. We see people that we've never seen before. They just drive by. They see the sign. They see the giant inflatables. They see all the adults going through the obstacle course. And they say, we've got to stop and see what's going on here. And they do, and they get the free food. And then maybe, just maybe, they have this opportunity to have this positive church experience. And they get to come and see what this is all about. But listen, you, everybody kind of point to yourself real quick. Exactly, I'm talking to you. Some of you did it way slower. You're like, okay, fine. You have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to help us with this day and make it something so perfect. We need people to help set up and tear down. We need people to help serve food. We need people to help with games. Like if you like kids and you're good with kids, we need people like you to help get everything organized and work with the kids. And if you don't like kids at all, we need people like you to yell at them when they get too close to the road. So we need everybody to be a part of this. If you would like more information about how you can sign up and be a part of this day, make sure you stop by the lobby on your way out at the guest services table, and you can sign up. There'll be somebody out there to answer any questions that you may have about it. And then also Sunday morning, we are going to have 3 services, a 6 a.m. sunrise service. I can see that all of you are like, yes, I was hoping it would be earlier than last year. And it is, because we're doing it later in the year. And so the sunrise is going to be significantly earlier this year. But if you like to get up early, I do. I'll be here. And it's going to be a fun thing. And then at 9 and 10:30, there'll be different services. That first one will be outside. I think it's going to be about 70 degrees at 6 a.m. on April 21st. Don't quote me on that, but something close to that. And then, obviously, Sunday morning, we're going to gather in here and celebrate at 9 and 10:30 that Jesus has risen from the dead. We got a lot of work to do in 4 weeks, okay? But that's why we're here. So today we're going to continue on in our series called The Minor Prophets, and we are looking at these 12 prophets in the Old Testament who wrote these 12 incredible, kind of like blog posts. They're short books. They're not the major prophets, but they're minor because they're short. And they wrote some incredible things. And as I've told you every single week, Israel in the Old Testament kind of went through this continuous cycle where they would have rebellion, meaning that they would go away from what God had asked them to do. They would say, God, we know that you want us to go this way, but we're going to walk this way instead. And then they would feel the pain and the consequences of their sin. And then they would do this thing called repentance, where they said, okay, we're walking towards sin, but now we're going to turn around and walk back towards God and what he wants for us. And then God would bring restoration. And this would happen on a constant cycle over and over again. Well, what the minor prophets did was they came around at the time that Israel was in rebellion, and they needed to repent. And they would often point them back to God. And I've asked you for the entire month of March to join me in reading through the minor prophets. I'm not even going to ask who has done it. But I'm just trusting that all of you did. Here's the thing, though. If you started the 29-day reading plan on March 3rd with the rest of it, guess when you will be finished? Next Sunday. Good guess. Next Sunday. If you didn't start then and you've pushed into April, that's okay. But if you haven't started yet, I've got 3 options for you. Number 1, you can start today and read quadruply as fast as everybody else. And you will finish by next Friday or by next Sunday. That's option number 1. You just got to read 4 days at a time. Option number 2 is you start today and you go into April. And that would be okay too. We can make that work. Option number 3 is you continue to wait until next Sunday when you only have 1 day left. and then you can try to get it all done. But listen, I'm afraid that if you do that, you're going to be that person that doesn't read it. You're going to be the only one in the entire church that didn't do it. Then everybody else is going to be talking about it. You're going to be left out. I don't want that to be you. So start today. If you haven't started yet, go for it. We're reading through the minor prophets. There's these 12 books. They're fun. They're maybe not so fun, but they're important because I believe that they speak to us right where we are as a culture today. And so far, what we've learned about is a guy by the name of Hosea and his story. We learned about Joel. We learned about Amos. We learned about Habakkuk. That's a fun name to say. And today, we're going to learn about one more. Now, we're wrapping this series up next week, which means that we have only gone through half of the minor prophets, which is why it's so important that you read all of this. Everybody got it? Yeah. All right. And again, like I told you on week 1, you don't want to go up to heaven and meet Zephaniah and him be like, how did you like my book? And you say, I didn't read it because it was only one of the minor ones. You don't want to be that person, okay? It would be an awkward moment. So make sure you go and read it. Now, today we're going to jump into the story of a guy by the name of Haggai. Haggai. If you have your Bible, you can turn there. We're not going to put it up on the screen just yet, but it's in between Zephaniah and Zechariah, if that helps. But I'm not sure if that's even pronounced right. Haggai, just not Hoagie. Haggai is the way that we're going to go with it throughout the day. Now, let me just tell you a quick thing here. Whenever just to kind of set up where Israel is in the time when Haggai is the prophet, whenever I ask my children, and parents, you can probably relate to this. Whenever I ask my kids, hey, we need to clean your room. Do you want to do it right now or do you want to do it later? Guess what they always say? Later. Hey, we need to go out and we need to put the laundry away. You want to do that right now or do you want to do it later? What do you think they say? Later. You know what? We need to make sure that we go ahead and do the dishes and get them put away. You guys want to do that now or do you want to do it later?
Shawnee wants to do it later.
I want to go and take you guys to get ice cream. Do you want to do that now or do you want to do it later?
Now.
Right now. How is that a universal language with all children and all parents? Whenever there's something difficult to do, whenever there's something that's not as easy, that's not as fun, at least up front, the answer is always later. But whenever there's something real fun to do, the answer is always right now. Well, I think what Haggai is about to teach Israel is this idea of obedience. And not obedience later, even though it seems like it would be much easier to do later and it's a little more tough to do right now. He's about to teach them the concept of obedience right now. So there are going to be some times today that I need your help. Okay, this is going to help everybody stay awake. When I say God wants you to have obedience, you're going to follow with right now. I point at you, you say right now. So God is going to teach us through Haggai today the importance of obedience right now. Right now. Not later, right now. And Haggai is kind of coming to Israel at this time when Israel, they thought they would be further along than they are. They thought that they would have made more. You ever get to a place in your life where you thought you would be further along than you actually are? You thought that things would be better. You thought that things would be different. And you look at your life and you're just kind of like, ugh. And you don't even have to be older to get to that place. You could about be in college, right? You could be like, I thought by the time I was 21, I would know what I wanted to do with my life. Maybe you're like, I thought by the time I was 40, I know what I wanted to do with my life. Or you know, maybe you thought that when you got your college degree that you would know what you wanted to do with your life and that you would actually have a job in the field in which you got your degree. Have you guys seen the statistics? It's staggering how many people have a degree in something that they have no job in. It's unbelievable. Maybe you thought, you know, by the time I'm 25, I'm going to feel like an adult, but really, there are a lot of people that are way more adulty than I am. And maybe you thought I'd have a family by now, I'd be married by now, I would have $1 million by now. But whatever it is, you thought you would already have achieved it. That's kind of where Israel is in this moment when Haggai comes around. They thought they would be farther along with this one particular thing that God had called them to be obedient to, but instead they decided to pull what my kids pull sometime and your kids pull sometime. Later. We'll do it later. We'll be obedient later. When God was asking them to be obedient, that was weak. Right now. Right now. And so that's where we're going to kind of pick up the story with Haggai. But before we get there, let me give you a little bit of the backstory, just so that we're all on the same page with where we've come from here. The year is around 587 when Haggai writes. Now I want you to rewind all the way back to the reign of King Solomon. You guys have probably heard about him. King Solomon. He was a king, and in his 4th year, he decided that he was going to build something. You guys know what he was going to build? A temple. a temple. This was going to be the place where God lived. Not like physically lived, like, he came home from work, he came there. No. This was where his presence lived. And in the Old Testament, in the Jewish religion, God, the temple was the epicenter of everything. People would come from miles and miles to go to this place because they built it so perfect. You know how much money they spent on this thing? It was the equivalent of probably $1 billion today. I'm not sure about that. Don't email me. But it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. They made this the most perfect thing, and they made this altar in there. It was perfect. And people would come from miles and miles around just to worship there and offer sacrifices there. And so this was kind of the perfect place. But then, after Solomon died, you guys know what happened? Israel turned evil. They stopped obeying God. They stopped doing the sacrifices, and they started worshiping idols instead. And when they did that, God began to let a series of things happen. As I told you guys last week when we were talking through Habakkuk, there was going to be this time where the southern kingdom of Israel and Jerusalem was overtaken. Well, that happened in 587. King Nebuchadnezzar, that's a real fun name. Nebuchadnezzar came along, and he destroyed the temple. He destroyed Israel. And he took the best and the brightest, which would be people like you, and he left everybody else back, which would be people like me, and he took them back to the capital of Babylon, and he said, we're going to make you our slaves. We're going to take you into captivity. Now, when we read that, or we hear that, we're just kind of like, oh, they were captivity. That's great. I want you to understand, this is like the equivalent of a country in our world right now coming and saying to the United States, you know what? We're going to bomb you if you do. We've developed this new ballistic nuclear missile that there's nothing you can do about it. We're going to bomb you if you don't surrender to us right now. And our leaders get together and say, you know what? The best thing for us to do is surrender. And then all of a sudden, the best and the brightest of us would be taken over to some other country, and we are now citizens of that nation, and the United States no longer exists. That's the equivalent of what happened to Israel. People, they were there for 50 years. Children, I'm not even 50 years old. There were kids my kids wouldn't have been born into captivity, and they would have never known anything other than that. That's where Israel is in this moment. And then, 50 years later, God allows them to come back to Jerusalem, and they begin to rebuild, guess what? The temple. Because it's been destroyed. And for 50 years, they've been thinking, we've got to get back and rebuild this thing where God lives. He's been homeless for 50 years. And we've got to go and build this thing up. And so they get back, and they start building. They lay the foundation, and it looks perfect. And then they put the altar in, and then guess what? They stop. And they say, we're going to be obedient to what God has asked us to do later. Not right now, but later. And that's where we pick up this story with Haggai. God has asked Haggai to go to Israel and tell them what's up and get them in gear and call them to obedience. Not later, but right now. Come on, guys. Right now. Right now. This is where we pick up the story with Haggai. Haggai is kind of a comedian prophet. He starts out really, really funny. You guys may not see this as funny as I do, but check this out. This is what Haggai says. It says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. These people. Do you guys know what God calls Israel throughout all the Old Testament? My people. My people. Fathers in the room, you may understand this. You ever come home and your wife says to you, you're not going to believe what your child did today? Ever hear that? Yeah. Not going to believe what your son did. You're not going to believe what your daughter said. And all of a sudden, it becomes yours. Thinking to myself, I remember, never mind, I'm not going to go there. But it becomes yours. And all of a sudden, God says, these people, they're not my people. They're these people. They say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. In other words, they say, God, we're going to be obedient to you, but we're going to be obedient to you later. We're going to say yes to what you have for us, but we're not going to do it right now. We're going to do it later. You know why they said later? Because it got difficult. And here's how it got difficult. There was this group of people called the Samaritans. You may have read about them in the New Testament. They were around in the Old Testament too. And they said, you know what? We don't want you rebuilding this temple. We want it to stay down because it suits our needs better, and we're going to oppose you on this. And all of a sudden, when the Samaritans started opposing this group of people that came back to Jerusalem to rebuild this temple, you know what they said? They said, fine, we won't build it. Instead, we'll go and build our own houses. And all of a sudden, they stopped being obedient to what God had asked them to do because it got difficult. And when it got difficult, when it got hard, when they didn't have the answers right in front of them, they said, fine, we're not going to be obedient right now, we'll be obedient later. Now listen, sometimes there are things that are difficult when it comes to being obedient to what God has for us, right? Like, is it easier to hold a grudge against somebody that's hurt you really badly or forgive them? Hold a grudge. Way easier. How hard is it to open your heart to that person? That's difficult. So sometimes Haggai and the people of Israel, they're right. It's difficult. And then he goes on. He says, then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses? And paneled houses apparently were like the most expensive houses of the day. It would be like the modern equivalent of having a nice, really big house, granite countertops, 80-inch TV screen, all that stuff, perfect house. This house, my house, the temple remains a ruin. Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. I want you to give careful thought to your ways. In other words, I want you to stop and think about what you're doing right now. You've told me that you want to be obedient to what I have asked you to do, but later, I want you to stop and think about this. And for the rest of this 15 minutes that we have left or so together today, I want you to stop and think about this through two lenses. I believe that in this room, God is asking you to be obedient when? Right now. Later? No. Right now. And there may be something. I want you to look through two questions. Number one, is there something in your life that God has asked you specifically to do? And you know what that thing is. Maybe he asked you yesterday. Maybe he asked you a month ago. Maybe he asked you 14 years ago like he did with Israel in this passage. But you have said, you know what? I'm going to handle that, but later. Maybe it's reaching out to somebody that you need specifically to tell about Jesus. Maybe it's getting your finances in order. Maybe it's getting your relationship with other people right. Maybe it's starting a ministry, writing a book, doing something like that you know God has specifically asked you to do. And you've said, you know what? I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it later. And God is saying he wants you to be obedient to it when? Right now. That's question number one. Question number two, is there an area of God's word that you know that you are in direct disobedience to? You know that if he were to look at you right now, he'd be like, are you even trying to live according to the word that I've put forward in your life? And if you were honest, you would have to be like, no, sir, I'm not even trying at all. And I am in direct disobedience to your word in any of the areas that God's word covers, and it's broad. I'm in direct disobedience. And so listen. If you find yourself in either of those places where you would say, you know what? There's something that God is asking me to do that I am completely disobedient to. Maybe it's something that he has specifically asked me to do that I've been ignoring, or whether it's something in his word that is true for everybody that I'm ignoring, but God isn't calling me to be obedient to it later. He's calling me to be obedient to it right now. And it's time for me to stop ignoring it. It's time for me to stop being like Israel. And maybe God has placed Haggai in your life today, maybe for the very first time, to tell you that the time is not later to be obedient. The time is right now. And it's time for you to step out of that, even when it gets difficult, even when it's hard, and say, you know what? God, what's most important to me is that I am in an obedient relationship with you. And when you do that, it changes everything. And so Haggai, he's going to begin to tell them, you need to give careful thought to your ways. And so for you today, here's what I think. This is something that I think you're going to be able to remember. Something that you can take home with you today and have in your life from this moment forward. Whatever that thing is, whether it's something that God has specifically called you to, or where it's an area of his word, what I want you to do is this. Help me out with this. I want you to read it together.
Choose the poo.
No, choose the P-O-O.
No poo.
You guys, come on.
Choose your poo.
Get your mind a little higher here. Choose the P-O-O, or the path of obedience. We're going to choose the of obedience. And when are we going to do it? Right now. Are we going to wait till later? We're going to choose to do it right now. Choose the, as you guys say, poo. Choose the poo. Choose the path of obedience. And when you do that, God will begin to work in your life in ways that you could not have possibly imagined that he could. Then he goes on to say this. He says, you have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. In other words, all the things that you're doing right now in disobedience to me, they don't matter. You think that they're going to fulfill you to have all these nice houses, all this money, all this food. You know what? It's not fulfilling you. It's like going in your pocket and falling right out. It's not fulfilling you without obedience to me. And then he says this again. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thoughts to your ways. Give careful thought to what you're doing right now. And then he does this. He says, go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. This is so simple. So if you find yourself in that place where you're like, you know what, there is something that I know God has asked me to do and I've been ignoring it. I've been saying later, when he wants me to do it right now. And you know what, there is an area of his word that I've been ignoring in my life and I've been living against, but I know he wants me to be obedient to it. Not later, but right now. You know what? Where do I start? Well, this is amazing what God does in this moment. He tells Israel, I'm going to give you just 3 simple steps. Number 1, I want you to go up to the mountain. Now, if I'm Israel, I'll be like, yeah, but that's still hard. You guys know how I feel about mountain climbing. It's hard. They didn't have cars, right? Mountain climbing is hard. Step number 1, all you got to do is go up to the mountain. Step number 2, bring down timber. If I was Israel, you know what I would say? That's still hard. You ever try to pull a tree down a mountain? Me neither, but I bet it's hard. And then, start building. That's it. Step 1, 2, and 3. Don't worry about steps 80 through 85. I want you to do this. Go up on the mountain, get some trees, and then start building. And listen, in your life, right now, whatever that thing is that God is asking you to be obedient to right now, I guarantee you that you already probably know the first step. If he wants you to be obedient in the area of finances and get out of debt, you know the first step is to stop spending more than you make. And you already know step 1. If the first step is that you're supposed to start loving people instead of being angry and hateful with people all the time, maybe step 1 is get a job at where you work at home. You guys will get that later. Okay. Or maybe there's another step. But you probably already know the first step. The first step is whatever that thing is, and then step 2, and then step 3. But you have to take the first step. And you don't want to do it later. You want to do it right now. Right now. Because that's when God has called you to be obedient. So he lays out these steps. And these are the steps that you can already do. And you already know what they are. And then he says this. These are kind of the consequences of their disobedience. He says, you expected much. But see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. In other words, because you were disobedient to what I asked you to do, you have nothing. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth is corrupt. These are the consequences of not choosing obedience right now. You know what some of us have a really bad tendency with? Or what I'm going to call selective obedience. Everybody say selective obedience. Going back to my original story a little bit ago, kids have this thing called selective hearing. Some adults have this thing called selective hearing, where you can be like, all right, we're going to get ready to go in 10 minutes. Everybody be ready. They didn't hear that. But if you whisper ice cream, they come from the neighbor's house, right? That's selective listening. Or you can be like, you know what, I think over the 4th of July week, we should probably take the kids to Chuck E. Cheese. And then like July 3rd, my son has written it down on his calendar. I could have said that in February. They know. Selective listening. Well, I think that sometimes we have this thing called selective obedience, where we only obey what we want to obey, and we leave the rest okay. But listen, I want you to understand, God, through Haggai, is telling Israel that that's not okay. That's not the way that this works. He wants you to be obedient later. Not later, but right now. In order to do that, you have to take step 1. I can remember, I told you guys this story once before. I'll tell you again, in case you forgot or missed it. When I was 18 years old, I had a job at a grocery store called ShopRite. It wasn't like the ShopRites here. It was really small. There were 6 of them, so I guess you could call it a chain. It didn't feel much like a chain. And I got brought on at $4.25 an hour. Within a month, I was crew chief making $5.50 an hour. I was expecting a little bit more from you guys on that. Yeah, bringing in the money. I had a car, I had a insurance payment, I had several different things I had to take care of, and I was bringing home money. I was working 40 hours a week, and then I began to feel strongly like God was telling me, you need to be in ministry. You need to be a pastor, and probably starting off with a youth pastor, because that's kind of closer to where you are. I don't think you're mature enough yet to handle adults. Maybe I'm still not, but there was this whole crew thing in this film. But the problem was that I worked 6 days a week, and there was no time for me to be a youth pastor or any other kind of pastor. And so God began to press on me, you need to leave this job and get a different one. But I said, God, I'm making $5.50 an hour here. I'm the crew chief. People answer to me, you know. But God began to impress on me. I said, God, I need this amount of money. And then this job opened up where I would be able to work just the amount of hours that I needed to be able to work. And it was at a daycare called the Academy for Little People. And I did not like children, especially little ones. And I said to myself, God, this can't be happening. And I'm only going to be working half the hours that I'm working here. God, I can't make this work. And then, 2 days after I said, fine, I'll do it, I accepted this job thinking I'm going to have to walk there because I'm going to have to get my car away. The pastor of the church where I was attending and serving, he said, we want you to be our youth pastor now, and we want to pay you $350 a month to do it. Which was a lot of money back then, at least for me. Which is exactly what I was giving up to leave ShopRite. Now listen, it's not about getting anything from it, but I want you to understand that when you say yes in obedience to God, when? Right now, God can begin to work in your life. Matter of fact, this is what he began doing in Israel. When they finally said yes, when they finally said, fine, we realized that there's going to be opposition. God began to get a hold of their hearts, and he began to change them. He said, now give careful thought to this. From this day on, consider how things were before. One stone was laid on another in the Lord's temple. In other words, consider how things were when you were living in disobedience. This is verse 15 through 19. It's going to be up there. There it is. Consider how they were. And then verse 16, when anyone came to a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. When anyone went into a wine vat to draw 50 measures, there were only 20. I struck all the work of your hands with blight, mildew, and hail, yet you did not return to me, declares the Lord. In other words, when you were living in disobedience, nothing was happening. But from this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, give careful thought to the day when the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. Give careful thought. You think he wants you to give careful thought?
Yes.
Is there yet any seed left in the barn? Until now, the vine and the fig tree, the pomegranate and the olive tree have not borne fruit. But from this day on, I will bless you. And it's all because Israel decided that they were going to begin being obedient. When? Right now. So here's what I'm asking from you today. Take the voice of Haggai, and I want you to choose the path of obedience. I want you to choose the path of obedience. You can use an acronym if that helps you to remember it. But I don't want you to keep waiting for that thing that God has asked you to do, or that part of his word that he's asked you to be obedient to. I don't want you to say later, because you're going to miss so much while you're waiting on later. When God can be working in your life right now, if you will say yes to him. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. And God, I pray for every single one of us that we would hear this, and that we would stop putting off till later what we know you've asked us to be obedient to today. That we would say yes, even when it's difficult. That we would say yes when it's hard. And God, that you would begin to show us steps 1, 2, and 3, and that we would have the obedience and the trust in you to stand up and take those steps. Help us to be obedient right now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. You guys have a great day. We'll see you back next week for the finale of the Minor Prophets. You don't want to miss it.